All right, we are here today. Welcome
Yeah.
everyone to next episode of Voices of E-commerce. Today I'm with Jenna Hoose. Jenna has a really kind of interesting history. Started as one of my students and but went off and became a web developer. I believe she worked at AT&T, RTI International, among other places. She's now at IBM
hmm
and works as a front-end developer on
hmm
their MyIBM portal. So welcome to the show, Jenna.
Hello, it's great to be here.
Thanks.
So what questions do you have for me?
Yeah, let's start. Tell me a little bit more about your history. So after, like, when you finished at ECU, what kind of led you to where you're at now?
Well, I kind of always had an interest, even back before college. I was the weird kid in the eighth grade and ninth grade making websites just because. Um, and I'm really attracted to like it being technology, but also kind of a visual thing while also being functional. And so I was making just small time stuff. And then I actually learned PHP with your class.
Hmm.
And then afterwards, I kind of kept doing like online classes and that kind of stuff. If you've ever heard of like Code School or Code Academy and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And anyways, and then eventually, I basically landed a full stack web development position at AT&T, and basically, I learned Perl there like pretty quickly, and it just kind of kept growing from there. Pretty much every position I've had similar technologies. Sometimes I'll focus, like one would be Laravel, which would be a framework of PHP. Um, other ones where I would start learning Angular and that kind of stuff. So I worked at big companies, small companies. I worked on like large, 22 people teams to even small teams of like, it was just me and one other developer. I worked at companies where they had a design team, while other companies, like the developers, there was no designer or like not even, you were it. And so I've kind of, found like I've had a lot of different types of experiences and that kind of stuff. I've recently focused more on the front end development. So living in JavaScript, Vue.js, Angular, and there's a huge difference between Angular JS and the modern Angulars. It's actually now in TypeScript. So I've done both. Regrettably, it's a little bit hard to jump from one to it's one thing to do a framework in the same language. It's another thing to switch to a new language that seems like it's JavaScript, but it's not.
Gotcha.
Deceptive.
Right, right. So, excuse me. So I know you said you worked at AT&T. What were some of the other companies you worked at?
I've worked for smaller companies, NetActuate. I worked for RTI. I had a really interesting, one of our applications that I worked at RTI was really interesting, and it actually dealt with radiation and environmental monitoring. So that was actually really cool.
Mhm.
And that was, well, I can go into like the application a little bit, where basically, for example, just like air quality and water quality, there's government facilities everywhere. But our app specifically helped nuclear power plants just monitor, like, 3 miles out, 6 miles out, like around the power plant, monitoring like the smallest trace amounts of radiation, just to,
Yeah.
to monitor for safety. We had nothing to do with the inside of the radiation monitoring at all, but it was just for environmental stuff. And anyways, and we had was like Leaf, and Leaf is basically a framework that does mapping, really nice in JavaScript. And anyways, we would have it so that we could pull many different graphs, D3 and high charts, where, we can monitor for 12 months or, this month or like today, the graphs and that kind of stuff. And then we also have the map where you could see all around the power plant where all the monitors were. And then we even took it a step further with like the exercise situation where, like, what if a disaster happened? Okay, well, here, a manager can go in and do like a drill scenario, emergency drill scenario where you, like, oh, here's the, the winds are like 400 miles per hour or something, like a hurricane, I don't know. And then, the direction is this, and then you could watch like a simulation of the plume going. So that's really cool. And so that's what I did at RTI, and that was very interesting.
That was all web-based, right? This application built.
Yes.
And was it internal facing or external?
Well, basically, like the raw data would obviously come from a third-party company. They would basically just have raw data of all their sensors and stuff, and they even had like one or two of their own weather towers, as well as pulling from like the nearest airport the weather. And so anyway, so it was also like monitoring the weather and like keeping track of it for at least 12 months. And anyways, so that would be raw data, and some of it was kind of messy, so we would put it into our own database, usually Oracle. There was one that the contract was different where they wanted in Postgres. But anyways, and then we would take it from there, basically put it in our database and sanitize it, and then use our database to like display all the data. But the raw data was really coming from them. And then basically we would host it, whatever thing that they wanted to host it on, for that company, and then so they would use it. So we basically took their data and made it very readable and human readable, and making their lives a lot easier rather than just staring at data and trying to infer. We made it so much easier. And so we did that for a couple of power plants, which I don't think I can say which one. All I can say is what countries, Saudi Arabia and Canada and the US.
Okay.
As far as I don't think I can say the company, but yeah.
Right. So this app you built, this was something that the power plants would use, or is this something that the information was available to the general public?
No, it was to the power plant themselves.
Okay.
Just because, they could send off fire, like they could send up, like if someone knew exactly the location of a sensor, which, I mean, obviously it's supposed to be fenced off anyways for so many miles around the plant, but we didn't want, like for most of them, they didn't want public knowledge of where the exact, like radiation monitors were.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff was delicate. We had to account for situations where, like, sensor 3 was saying that the wind was 200 miles per hour, but like, sensor 4 that was like a mile away was saying the winds were, like 3 miles per hour. And like, we would have to also like, not just do detections of like, when something's going on with radiation, but also like, hey, maybe the sensor's not reporting correctly.
Right.
Because we didn't want to have a false alarm,
Right.
So.
Interesting. So after that, you went to work at IBM on the MyIBM Portal. Now, so this is very outward facing towards customers, right? Tell us a little bit about that and what you're doing at IBM.
So basically, IBM has their hands in a lot of different pots. They do cloud computing. They also do cloud management, even if like, you're not buying IBM Cloud, you're using, say, AWS or what have you. And so basically there's many different software where it's just managing your cloud services, as well as cloud services themselves. And I mean, there's so many that, like, even though I've been at IBM, I still don't know all the products that we sell. It's so many, like thousands. But anyways, the IBM store that I work on, my team works on, we basically, after you become a customer, because usually it's a business to business, so usually there's special pricing and all that stuff. But once you become a customer, you can actually sign in and you'll see MyIBM. And it's basically, you can go into the product that you have. You might have multiple products with IBM, and you can manage it. You can be like, all right, I want to upgrade to the platinum version, or, oh, I need to downgrade to the silver version. It could also be where some software is by seat. So like, say a college professor would buy like a bunch of like cloud, networking stuff. And basically you would buy, you would be the administrator, but you would have multiple seats for like 200 students or something. You could basically manage the seats and change them, from semester to semester. And so there's a lot of managed, the customer facing, like they manage, and I want to buy more, I want to buy less. Oh, I want to buy this add-on to this product I already have, or I want to, or I want to switch it to like stop this add-on, but use this other add-on for this product. And so anything like that is what I work on, as well as my team members. It's, every day it's like a new product. And so we pull in our APIs from other teams that like each team has their own product that they handle.
Right.
And so we'll pull in data from that. And then we basically try to make it all fit and look like together, basically, and have it the same scheme and everything like that, and kind of behave the same way as much as possible, even though some software product management is a bit different from one to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And things are constantly changing, products are constantly updating. They might ask for more things, but we have to like think of, well, if we do it for this way, we have to make it so that it works for all other products. Even though this might be the first product that has this feature, we have to make it in such a way that if another product, adds this particular management feature, we'll have to add this, adding we want to have more than one administrator on a product or that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it gets really in deep.
It sounds like it. Yeah. I don't know if you ever crossed paths with Jonathan Cook. He was another ECU student, but he's now at Cisco, and he was telling me about a project he's working on that sounds in some ways a little similar, but there's to the MyIBM portal, except his is not customer facing. It's all, his customers are all internal to Cisco. They don't have an outward facing cloud services platform, at least not yet. It seems like every tech company has some sort of cloud platform though. So it's probably a matter of time. It is
the big race. Cloud and cloud management is where everything's kind of heading these days.
Right. And so you're saying the IBM portal, the MyIBM portal is basically for managing these cloud services that IBM offers.
Or any other product, like any other IBM product. And to clarify, even products where it's still an IBM product, but it's cloud management rather than like IBM Cloud itself. So you could be using that management tool for a bunch of AWS, cloud.
AWS is Amazon Web Services, right?
Yeah.
For the people who don't know, who are listening.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I know there's that's always all the acronyms that can throw people off. So like Amazon, do you also work with like Google Cloud and Microsoft OneDrive or whatever?
Yes.
Azure.
IBM. What's different about IBM is that they've made it kind of a big point that even though we do cloud as well, there's not a lot of places that do management for no matter what cloud service you use. There's not a lot of places that have software where it'll work with any cloud. Usually, if you do with AWS, you can only manage with other, if you have a bunch of cloud servers with AWS, that's all you can manage together. And so that's kind of the difference with IBM, is that they're also selling software where it doesn't matter what cloud you use. You can have AWS and also Google Drive, and you can have whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. And so you are working on this portal. So what are some of the types of things? I think you broke down a few of the things that you work on, but maybe you can talk through some of your current projects. What are you doing with this portal? Whatever you're capable of saying. I know maybe some of it's confidential, but skip that and go with what you can say.
Well, I believe it's already been released to production. So if you're an IBM customer, you probably could see it. Recently, it sounds very minor, but because we had to make it work with so many other products, even though only a couple of products have this feature, we wanted to add for IBM to get more money, we basically have it so that if a product has an add-on that the user isn't subscribed to, it actually wasn't displayed on the management page of the product. It was only in the store, which is actually there's a separate store for IBM for things you want to buy, because depending on the deal, when you work for a sales rep, the pricing might be weird and that kind of stuff. So, but there wasn't anything that showed okay, well, you have this product, but you don't have this add-on, but you could buy it, and here's the pricing and all that stuff. And so I recently added that, and that ended up, it seems simple, but it ended up taking a long time.
Yeah, I could imagine. Yeah.
Because you got to think IBM's an international company, the pricing, depending on different types of dollars and that kind of stuff. You have to think of the different languages.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, think of like, okay, well, the pricing might be different depending on the country, and then we have to pull like the customer data depending on of their current, product, because the rate is similar to what the product is, and so basically we pull like that's it's all a giant like algorithm that we had to run through and get a bunch of data, and hopefully and cross our fingers like hopefully this displays correctly, because there's some things that are out of our control. We don't deal with billing directly. We just send it data and we give it this data back.
Right.
So yeah.
Interesting. And so yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, that integrated of how you pull that together, and I can imagine, especially when you're dealing with multiple different clients who do things slightly differently, I would imagine. That
in different countries, different languages, and that kind of stuff. And yep.
Wow.
Because not only that, he goes like the dollar amount's not a dollar. Sometimes it's a pound. Sometimes it's, even that.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, this is an international site. So how do you adapt for these different languages and countries? How do you handle that?
The official term is internalization or internationalization. A lot of people just say like 18N, and all it is basically you take a lot of key phrases, if not all your key phrases, everywhere on like the description of whatever you're displaying, all in basically JSON files under 18N or whatever folder, and basically we actually have a plugin already set up so that it detects what language the browser's in.
Okay.
And so basically it'll pull from that. And typically what happens is, well, if we add anything new, even if it's text, we basically put it in the English JSON file, and then we actually push it up, and then it automatically creates a ticket for basically the international team to have like several people that know several different languages and translate it. And then they'll add to like the other JSON files that are like for French and German and that kind of stuff. And they'll add that, and then they'll push that up. And so there is a little bit of a delay, but it's usually with IBM is pretty agile, at least the teams that I've interacted with, where, it's about 2 weeks or a week for one sprint. So that's pretty quick.
Interesting. And so you kept saying JSON, and again, that's one of those acronyms, JavaScript object notation, I believe.
Yes.
I studied that once a few years ago. So
yes.
And what is JSON for people who don't know?
It's basically a way of writing things. For example, you could say, okay, if you have a list of books, you could write it with JSON where it could be, it could be a title, like it has brackets, and it'll have a title, and then it'll have like an author, and it'll have a description of the author and whatnot. And then it'll be like a comma, like I'm getting really technical probably. And then there's another bracket of like, oh, here's the title and the author and whatnot. And you can add more information where you can do price for each one. So it's just a way of organizing data where it's nice to pass around on the internet, basically.
Structured data. How is it different than XML?
Much. Pardon?
How is it different than XML?
XML, you kind of create, unless you're following some kind of rigid formatting, XML, you kind of create your own tags, also known as like, it looks like HTML, but there's not official tags. You can create your own tags.
Yeah.
With JSON, it's basically with brackets and that kind of stuff, and it's, I don't know, for what I found, because I've actually dealt with APIs that were in XML versus APIs that send JSON. It's easier to deal with JSON, honestly, from what I've experienced.
Okay.
And there's even with some databases, you could add like a column, just kind of like with Excel, where you can do like a number column or money column or whatever. You can do a JSON column. So kind of the same thing with databases, you can do a JSON column. Although usually when you do that, you have to really think, do I really need a JSON column?
Yeah, right.
But you can do that if you want.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
like,
So you're mentioning the various APIs, so application programming interface. And so you're having to basically make those connections between all these different APIs and then the front
yeah,
portal. Is that right? Okay.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
you're passing JSON files, or sometimes you mentioned putting them into a folder, right? At sometimes.
For JSON, so basically our application that we manage, there's a lot of the, especially the new JavaScript frameworks will have a file that's set for basically internalization, where basically there'll be 18N, like somewhere on your application, you can get like a no package manager, NPM, and you can actually, there's tons of things that kind of do internalization for you, which is great, where they don't make translations for you, but they'll create the folder automatically on your application, and then they'll fill out like, you know, so many languages, and what you have to do is basically put in tags or brackets depending on how you're filling in your UI, if you will, your HTML, and then basically have it have the same variable name in JSON, and then you would write it basically as a key in JSON, and basically, and then you would write like whatever sentence you would needed to write basically in English, and then you still have to have someone who knows the other language that you, or whatever languages you want, and translate it. You could use Google Translate, but there are sometimes grammatically it's not correct.
Right, right.
And sometimes like the names of things, like if for example, if it's IBM Cloud, if you directly translate it, it'll translate the word cloud, even though the product is called IBM Cloud. And you don't want to translate the names.
Right.
So it's better to have a team of people, or, you know, team members in Saudi Arabia that know the language.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. So tell us what your day-to-day activities look like. So like when you wake up in the morning, what do you have, like a list of topics you need to do, and then, or do you have a meeting? How does your day start?
Typically, every morning our team starts with SCRUM, which is just basically, or stand up. Some places call it stand up, but we call it SCRUM. And it's part of the Agile methodology of how business is processed with software teams. And anyways, Scrum meetings, it's a short 30-minute, meeting where it's like, okay, this is what I've been doing, or this is what I just finished up. This is what I'm going to, work on today, and this is like, if you run into any hiccups, like this is what, I'm running into trouble with this, or like I foresee, like I can't continue until I get the information from this other team that we depend on for information. And so you can kind of announce, and basically it's just and everyone's supposed to like help out everyone. And so everyone goes around and, kind of does the little announcement. And then basically, like, oh, well, I, worked on that, like, last month, and I'm really familiar with that area of the code. Why don't we get together after Scrum and work on that and that kind of stuff.
Gotcha.
And so, yeah. And so after that, depending, I would probably continue, either pick up a new ticket or story. It depends on where you work, whether they call them stories or tickets. And they're just small little projects that you basically work on, and so that's what I would do afterwards, unless, somebody needed help with something that I was familiar with, and then I would continue on. Sometimes if I'm in between, like if I just finish up a story or a ticket, however you want to call it, I'll basically do code reviews, where basically you can go in and look at pull requests, which if you're familiar with Git and GitHub and that kind of stuff, where a teammate's like, oh, hey, I want to go ahead and, I want to merge this code. I'm done with this ticket. I want to merge this code change to production, please review it. And so basically anyone on our team can go look at our pull request list, and basically, go through and, approve it. And for our team, it's 2 approvals just two team approvals. And it's really just, there's sometimes there's just small stuff that like, if you tunnel vision, there's still some small stuff that you miss. You're like, oh, you forgot to like add a comment here, or like, oh, you could probably like you have like a semicolon that's not where it's supposed to be, or like, oh, or you wrote this line here, but you could probably borrow from like our existing code that I knew of that was in another file or something.
Right.
That kind of stuff. And so usually what I do personally is like when I'm in between two stories or tickets, I'll do that. Some team members like to do in the morning some code reviews and then continue on. There's been times where I would on a very large story or ticket where I'll code review anyways, and then in the morning and then continue on with my ticket. But if I'm on a short ticket, I'm like, I'd rather wait, a day or so until I'm done and then do code reviews, because you have to switch branches to really, and then test it like a quality assurance, test it like QA, and actually like click around like as if you were a user, as well as looking at the code changes themselves. Right. So switching branches is kind of annoying if you're in the middle of developing.
Yeah, when you say switching branches, what exactly are you referring to? That is.
That would be Git, Git is the most popular. I believe was it SVN I forget the acronym, but it controls version control. And okay. Yeah, and so you ever like, for example,
you have two different branches.
Yeah, a feature branch, a master branch, and then if you have multiple teammates, they might have their own feature branches coming off of the master branch. And merging is basically, obviously, taking your changes and putting it to master branch.
Right.
And usually when you want to do merge, you do a pull request. I would hope you would do a pull request if you're going to, before you merge.
Right, yeah, yes.
The industry no if you don't.
So, and then you mentioned GitHub, so that's a place where you manage your Gits and all the versioning and the branches. Yes. And so what other software do you use? I mean, what do you use for development?
Lately, I've been using with Visual Studio Code, which actually is a free text editor with Microsoft. Okay. But another popular one would be Sublime Text.
Okay.
There's some people that use not Notepad like on Windows, but like Notepad 2 or Notepad++.
Yeah.
But I would say, and there's also what's called WebStorm or PHP Storm. It's all by IntelliJ. Okay. Those are like you do a trial and then you have to pay for it. I tend to stick to free stuff, popular free. So I like Visual Studio Code. I actually for a long time used a kind of unheard of one called Komodo text editor. The text editor of their thing was free, but their IDE, which had a lot of extra features in it, was paid, but I just used the text editor. But yeah, those are a bunch of text editors. And funny story, when I started out, like in high school coding, I would write my entire website in regular Notepad, like on Word.
Wow.
So no helpers to like as you're typing, it pops up and like it assumes. You know how like you're typing and there'll be like a spell check that fixes the word for you automatically without you do anything. Yeah. With text editors, so like you start typing and they're like, oh, you mean this tag, and it will like complete the tag for you, and it saves your fingers. Like my fingers like would hurt. Like it saves your fingers. I promise you. And so text editors are good. I would highly recommend Sublime or Visual Studio Code for. If you want something that's free, that's well used, and there's tons of plugins and extensions you could add, so you can make it really customized. So those are pretty great.
Nice. So I'm going to ask you a little bit. Can you think of a particular situation that was difficult or hard problem you had to deal with on the job? And tell us a little bit about that situation. What was your thought process? How did you resolve it?
Well, for me, I've always, my strong suit is, as long as something touches the UI, I'm pretty good. Even if it's a database that eventually I'll see the database changes on the UI. So I don't like cron jobs because cron jobs are basically just basically a script that runs every so often. You can set it on the the server to run every 2 hours or every day or at once a week or something. And basically, the way things were written with legacy code, we had a database that was unrelated to another database that had similar data, but not exactly the same data. And basically, there was issues where the cron job that was written was bogging down the server like terribly. And so I had to rewrite it so that it would translate like much faster and cleaner. And the other issue too is that because it was written not so, I mean, again, in fairness, it was 13 years old. As I say, it needs a lot of love. It's very legacy code. And it was written like way back when, before the company obtained the ownership of the other database, in fairness. So anyways, I had to basically think about time and, basically think about UUIDs or GUIDs, which is basically, it's like a hash for identifier or like a primary key in a database. It's just another way of doing it, right? Like a primary key. Mm-hmm. And that's way, for example, especially with a huge database that has like, say, 3 different mirrors, basically 3 databases of the same kind, you want to make sure that it's that exact record. And so it's a way to be more, definitive. And you can actually write the algorithm that calculates the ID if you want as well.
Okay.
So anyways, basically I had to think of, okay, well, I need to do the timestamp, but the timestamp might be different on the database server of the second one versus the first one. And then I also have to think of the UI of people putting in data, of like adding a new, and this was like user management. And so basically, you didn't want to have a bunch of like Kellys or something in the data, like there was already duplicates. And so I had to solve the duplicate issue. I had to solve the timing issue of like, well, here's kind of like the timestamp right now, but over time in the milliseconds, they'll start drift apart after like, 8 years or something. And I had to think of all of that. And so what originally the cron job was written so that it would look at 2 things, it compare every single column in that table and see if it was the same. And again, this cron job was like, killing the server. And so what I did is I actually had to normalize the database a little bit, this really old database. It needed to be normalized more, but, with time and money and that stuff. So I added actually timestamps to these tables. And so basically then, if the timestamp is ever different, basically the cron job automatically picks it up and just assumes it's new. Doesn't compare every single column to every single column from database to database. So it basically just compared one column to one column, of like the updation date, because, users' addresses might change, et cetera, that kind of stuff. And so that was really tough. It took longer than I wanted to, just because like, oh wait, I have to do time math because this is a cron job that runs. It's not just one time it would run, and it's not something that would always run if a user enters something, because one database was attached to the UI, and then like this other database was attached to another application, but they would share similar data. So that was always, because you could have one update from one and one update from another, and then you had to go back and forth to make sure, which one won essentially. So that was kind of tough.
Sounds like
there was no UI at all, like in the sense of like comparing the right data to the right data. It's just just JSON or like looking at the database. Like there wasn't any because you don't display after the user puts in their measure, like there's you don't redisplay. Like I couldn't go as sign into the application as myself and then look at like other people's, like to make sure the profile is correct. I couldn't do that. So security. So it's kind of tough because there was like when I was doing it, there was no direct UI to look at for the changes to be correct. Yeah.
All right. Well, it sounds like you've had a number of different positions at different companies. What do you think has been the hardest career choices you've made?
Well, it's more less technical and more just kind of more relatable probably to any industry. There's kind of two things. I once had to turn down an offer that that I just didn't think the position was a good fit. It seemed very high stress, and it seemed to deal with a language that I wasn't super familiar with, and that was majority of the. It's one thing to where every once in a while you'll have to do this new thing that you haven't done, versus like 90% of the time you're gonna have to do this new thing that's like completely unrelated to any language you've ever done. It's very different, and so it was really tough. I had no prospects at the time, and like between two different contracts, like after my contract ended, I was just looking at your savings account and you're like, but and it was really tough because like I just don't think it's a good fit, and like it's really hard to
walk away.
And then the other thing, which is kind of a similar situation, where basically this was earlier in my career where I turned down an offer that basically I researched the company, and the company was just in its early. It was a startup. It was early stages, but it seemed like it ran into some trouble and was unstable at the time, and it was really tough to say no because like it was dealing with a language and a framework I've wanted to work on. Like I was so excited to finally do. And it was so hard to say no because it's just like, I don't want to start working there and then the company go under in like 3 months. And so it was so hard. It's kind of, a balance of like, you want to go somewhere where you'll be successful too. They're not just interviewing you, you're interviewing them. And it's important to find, it sounds really weird, but it sounds like it's kind of like marriage or dating or something where you want a good mesh, even if they like you, you kind of want to, will I be able to stay here for a long time? Will this, will this be a place that will make me successful,
Yeah.
And it's tough.
Yeah.
It feels tough.
It is. Well, on that, that's some good advice. Do you have any other advice for is someone interested in getting into or starting a career as a web developer?
I would say you will always be learning, always. And it's not like a mean thing or anything. I've actually really liked going to, there's tons, Code School, which was now bought out by PureSite. There's Code Academy. Mm-hmm. There's also Udemy as well. And a lot of those places, it's like either a subscription of like $30 or $50 a month or something like that. Mm-hmm. And usually too, they'll have like Christmas discounts, by the way. You should, just so you know, look around November. But anyways, and other times too, like Udemy is by class, where basically there's some classes that are $200 or $400, but then they'll have sales. Like I swear, almost like, once a month they'll have sales where something that was $200 is like $14, and I'm like, oh, well, might as well. There's been times I actually have several classes on Udemy where I purchased, but like I've gotten so many that were like, it was the right time to buy. But I'm like, I still have like 6 classes to like finish. Yeah. So, and so a lot of those are very, very helpful where, I believe Linda and even LinkedIn started kind of diving into that.
LinkedIn bought Linda. And so it's now LinkedIn Learning.
Okay, that's what I was like. I could have sworn like there's LinkedIn. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know our school does. I don't know about other schools, but we have a subscription to LinkedIn Learning. So all of our students now have access to all those videos for free, basically.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And not only that, there's been a huge uptick in the last like 2 or 3 years of just like how-to stuff on YouTube. That's completely free. You just got to know the keywords, what to search, and that kind of stuff. And so a lot of that's really helpful. I mean, with being in tech, every 5 years, it's approximately every 5 years, it's old technology, and it's always changing. Sometimes even like for example, Angular, they come out with a new version of Angular about like once a year. Admittedly, though, in fairness, with the exception of Angular 1 to 2, that was a huge jump. But since then, there's been small changes.
Right.
Like, for example, the difference between PHP 5 and 7 that I noticed was like 8 different functions, like built-in functions that they changed.
Right.
So, but so that would be one big thing. The other thing is just kind of reiterating that, the industry standards, like it used to be where like if you went to a coding class or if you went to work, there was a development server basically where you would like test and stuff off of, and it would be under like your name, it'd be under your developer. And nowadays everything is like on your computer, where it's all local hosting where you're developing. And so like the industry standards probably change a lot faster than kind of, other industries. And there's a lot of changing. So because of that, for example, I've seen it where, and it's happened to me as well when I was a contractor, that once the project was done, once the app was built, you got no more work, you're done.
Yeah.
And so like it's pretty typical to see like, I've talked to several recruiters and they say like that, usually the turnaround is like every around 2 years approximately, where basically just things keep changing. And a lot of businesses, they'll just, once the project's done, it's done, and then it's just time to move on to somewhere else. And so occasionally there'll be places where it's like, oh, now we're just going to move this whole team onto this different project, but sometimes it doesn't happen. So
right.
Like that, it's just constantly changing. You want to always be learning. And it sounds like, it's different between taking a regular college course where there's a set schedule and stuff. A lot of go at your own pace, like you pay $30 a month, or you buy a course for like $15 or something, and you can go at your own pace. And it's short focused learning, very surgical on like a particular framework or a particular way to do something in a particular language and that kind of stuff that, you can really focus on. And yeah, those are kind of the things I would probably look into if you want to pursue a career as a web developer, and kind of what to expect as well, that it's constantly changing.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's one reason why I love teaching it, is because I know I'm never going to get bored.
Exactly. That's what I tell people, actually. It's just, it is a little bit kind of a drag where you're like, oh, and I have to learn this new framework. But at the same time, like, I know that I would get bored. I would get bored doing the exact same thing over and over again. And, so that's kind of like the balance of like, well, I might have to constantly learn, but at the same time, I'll never, ever, ever get bored.
Very true. Well, I think that brings us to an end. So thank you very much, Jenna. It was a wonderful conversation, a lot of great stuff. And we will call it a day. Thank you.
All right.